Today I am working on the steering trunnions. And what is a steering trunnion? Number one, let me just start off. I don't know if that's really the correct name for this part, but that's what I call it. I call it a steering trunnion. Essentially what it is a piece of 3/4 inch bar stock, or actually it was a piece of bar stock that was bigger than 3/4, but turned down to 3/4, has this little tiny lip at the top, and it was bored for a 3/8 inch rod. This particular one goes on the steering block on the bottom of the steering shaft, and then an RJ35 has a steering link, which looks like this, essentially goes into this trunnion on the steering block, and then there's another trunnion right here that the corresponding other end of the steering link goes into. Essentially, here it is. Okay, and then this end of the steering center link is 3/4 inch bar that's welded into place and has a snap ring at the bottom. This part's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. So we're just going to put that off to the side, and we're going to talk about these things right here. Now, these are pretty worn. This one here is not so bad. This one here definitely has a pretty heavy groove. I don't think my camera's going to pick it up that well, but there is right there. There's like a pretty good groove, and these things actually slop around. Like you see that the actual spindle and the trunnion is totally blown out, so it slops around a lot, gives you a lot of play in the steering, and we're going to fix that today. Number one, these are the spindles that came off of the RJ35 that I'm working on. They are worn fairly well, so I went out to my shed and I dug out, as always, another pair of spindles that came off another RJ that are in much better shape. So to make these trunnions, you can do one or two things. You can get a piece of bar stock, a 1-inch piece of bar stock, let's say, and turn it down to 3/4 inch and then bore the 3/8 inch hole. Or you can do it the backwoods way, like I do from time to time. I mean, I've machined them, but the other way is what I do, works just as good. Take a piece of 3/4 inch bar stock, bore your 3/8 inch hole, then I trimmed it down. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it to length, and basically I'm going to cut it the length from the end to the bottom of the plate, or the machined head, I guess you would call it, the original trunnion. What I'm going to use is I'm actually going to weld a washer to the top of this. I'll center the washer over the top of the piece of bar stock and then just weld it into place. Essentially, I made a trunnion. The other thing I can do too with the washer is I can make a bigger, like this is fairly small right here. This is the surface area that sits on top of the spindle itself. I can make the washer a little bigger, supplying a better load capacity. So this thing, when it wants to torque, it's going to be actually putting more surface area on top of the spindle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this to size, and then I will get the welder out and we'll weld some washers in place. Well, the trunnions are made, and just welded on those washers, as you can tell. So I started from the, unlike on the frame where I started with the thicker frame and dropped it down to the plug and then back up and then dropped it back down. I did it the opposite way on this one. I hit the 3/4 inch rod first and then bring the bead up to the washer. I do that only because this metal and the frame metal was thicker than the part that I was trying to attach. So in other words, the frame metal was thicker than the plug. So I don't want to hit the plug first and then kind of instantly melt the plug. I wanted to melt the frame, touch it to the plug, and it's basically the same theory with this, but just in opposite form. I want to start the bead, melt the 3/4 inch rod, and bring it up to the washer. And as you can tell, the welds are pretty good. They're nice and flat, and There's really no issues with them. They're totally filled in. The trunnion itself is fairly centered, and everything works. I mean, drops right into the spindle with very little wiggle, and that's what we want. We want this thing just to spin and not wiggle much in the spindle itself. I did test it in the steering, block on the frame, up underneath the frame. Here's the other one, and same thing. You know, it's nice and you know, just a little bit of play, I guess, but there really isn't much. And that's what's really going to set the steering apart from other tractors. Is if you watch my other tractor videos, the one thing I really dislike is when a restored tractor still has the worn out sloppy steering, and that's not going to be the case with this tractor. So if you don't have access to a lathe and 1-inch bar stock to make a new trunnion, what you can do is exactly what I did. Drill a 3/8 hole, cut the piece 1 1/4 inches, find a nice washer, and then just weld the washer right to the top of the piece of bar stock. And now we have a brand new trunnion, no wear, slides in everything real easy, and we'll tighten up that steering. Alright guys, well, busy weekend this weekend. Started off with an axle that didn't quite work out, and I'll give you the story on that later. We made the replacement bearing stud for the brake kit and the bearing side or the gear case cover, and we made the new trunnions. So the tractor's moving along nicely. It's starting to get real cold outside, so my videos might not be coming up quite as much, only because I don't have heat in my garage and I just don't freeze. I just don't find that fun. But there's still a host of stuff that needs to be done. Alright, well, thank you very much. Talk to you later.